The U.S. military recently announced a complete halt to maritime trade moving to and from Iran. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has publicly stated the U.S. plans to strictly enforce this blockade. To back this directive, Central Command has deployed an immense physical presence, positioning 10,000 troops and dozens of warships in the region. The White House press office confirmed the scope of this operation, clarifying that the naval blockade is fully implemented against vessels of all nations entering or departing Iranian ports. However, shipping data indicates a glaring discrepancy between the stated military policy and the actual movement of global trade. Evaluating the success of a modern blockade requires looking past the sheer tonnage of naval destroyers, because military presence alone cannot dictate the flow of maritime logistics. This topographical map strips away standard labels to show the physical geometry of the Strait of Hormuz, the primary theater for this operation. At its narrowest choke point, the distance across the water is roughly 25 to 30 nautical miles. It is flanked by Iran to the north and the Musandam Peninsula, an extension of Oman, to the south. Under international maritime law, the territorial waters here are split exactly in half between these two sovereign nations. Because the strait is so narrow, there are 0 international waters in this corridor. Every vessel transiting this choke point is physically moving through the contiguous territorial waters of either Iran or Oman. Standard naval interdictions rely on the legal jurisdiction of the high seas. Enforcing a blockade within the Strait of Hormuz requires the United States to operate warships directly inside another country's sovereign borders. Iran interprets this inherently as a belligerent action and has openly threatened retaliatory strikes against shipping routes in the broader Sea of Oman and the Red Sea. The strict geographic limits of Hormuz guarantee that a clean, legally isolated military blockade is physically impossible to execute. This animated grid maps the pre-war maritime traffic through the strait, which averaged between 140 to 170 commercial ships per day. Since the blockade began, that volume has plummeted to around 14 or 15 ships daily. Yet, despite the massive military deployment, roughly half of those remaining ships are still successfully navigating the choke point and docking at Iranian ports. They achieve this through a technical workaround known as AIS spoofing. Crews manipulate their automatic identification system to digitally broadcast a falsified registration, presenting their vessel as a different ship entirely, flying a different national flag. Alternatively, captains utilize the simpler tactic of going dark, shutting off their transponders completely to slip past radar monitoring. Going dark is heavily stigmatized in the press, but it is a standard operational practice utilized routinely by US and EU naval fleets traversing the exact same region. These institutionalized evasion tactics render purely physical naval blockades highly porous. This chart tracks commercial shipping volume against the rising cost of maritime war premiums. The credible threat of retaliatory missile strikes forces private insurers to either suspend coverage for the entire region or hike their premiums to unsustainable levels. Analysts at J.P. Morgan calculated the baseline capital required to ensure the vessels currently trapped or operating in the Gulf. That baseline requirement is a staggering $352 billion. To counter this market freeze, the U.S. Development Finance Corporation proposed working with private providers to offer a sovereign insurance backstop. The total value of that U.S. pledge is roughly $40 billion. That massive capital deficit paralyzes shipping logistics, entirely independent of how many naval escorts Central Command provides. The strict market logic of commercial risk, rather than military authority, is the true mechanism halting global trade. This diagram maps how a localized bottleneck at Hormuz creates branching, non-linear shocks across global markets. The primary disruption is energy, the immediate loss of roughly 10 million barrels of daily oil supply. This directly impacts domestic infrastructure, starving California refineries relying specifically on Middle Eastern medium-sour crude. It also creates extreme global price distortions. A physical barrel of oil recently sold on the spot market in Sri Lanka for $280, double the standard global rate. That energy disruption immediately bleeds into the secondary market of heavy industry in allied Gulf nations. When an aluminum smelter in Abu Dhabi lost power due to the regional constraints, the facility experienced a catastrophic systems failure. The molten aluminum rapidly cooled and solidified inside the plant's piping. You cannot simply restart a plant in this condition. the heavy infrastructure is permanently destroyed and must be completely replaced. Supply chain choke points cause irreversible physical destruction to downstream industrial capacity. The tertiary shock targets a highly specialized niche, the global helium market. Qatar is a massive node for this resource, specifically operating the Ras Laffan plant, the world's single largest producer of helium. Helium is a non-negotiable chemical input. You cannot substitute it out of advanced manufacturing processes. Global semiconductor and microchip fabrication relies directly on this gas to function. The exact same input is required to operate medical imaging and hospital MRI machines. With shipping lines paralyzed and reserves dwindling rapidly, these two distinct sectors are forced into a direct allocation conflict. This flowchart illustrates how the high-margin, heavily capitalized AI tech sector will effortlessly outbid healthcare providers for whatever helium supply remains. The tangible human cost of this macroeconomic shift is a sudden degradation of medical logistics, pushing routine MRI appointments out by 6 months. In a hyper-optimized global economy, isolating a single state actor is an illusion. The shock instantly degrades the baseline of advanced manufacturing, technology, and human healthcare.